Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CRO Initiative. Today, we have us here who's currently a CMO, a fractional CMO, if you will, with the specialty in AI. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you, Chrisley. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, yes. And right off the bat, I love to ask, what is a fractional CMO with a specialty in AI even mean?
It's a great question. I think when we look back in the last year or 2 years, just through the development of generative AI and other marketing automation, we're seeing, I think, what can be described as a revolution in marketing. A lot of companies, obviously, there's the basic usage of AI in design or content, but when we really look at how do you integrate some of these tools to existing tech stacks or CRMs, automated agents and actors. So for me, I exist in this kind of place where I'm trying to help companies, mid-tier SMEs and enterprise customers really crack the code and at least get their teams to start using these tools together, both using classic CRMs and CDPs with generative AI tools.
Okay. And with that, in terms of your fractional work, to backtrack into that, what tools are you primarily using in your space? Is it more in the B2B or B2C space? How does all that come into play?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm primarily working now in B2B SaaS,
Hmm.
obviously because of SaaS and cloud has overtaken a lot of the business tools now. So primarily my work today is helping B2B and B2B SaaS companies figure out this cubic cube of how to generate leads, how their sales and marketing and customer service can work together efficiently throughout the funnel, how to drive SEO and other top of the funnel metrics. So that's where my focus area is right now.
Okay. Okay, great, great. And so in that demand gen and lead gen side of things.
Yeah, exactly. And how that ties up with obviously revenue, right? Because
Hmm.
lifeblood of all of this is how do we increase that top line growth for these companies?
Yeah. Okay. No, that sounds very interesting. And leveraging AI for demand gen and lead gen for these B2B companies, what channels are you primarily focused on, or what channels do you feel are probably some of granted, every industry is a little different depending on the audience, so on and so forth. But where are you seeing, from a generic standpoint, more success than others? Are you using like cold email, or is this primarily on LinkedIn? Run me through your demand gen process.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. What we saw in the last couple of years is this with generative AI. Obviously, it's a large language learning model, but it really requires high quality and focused data for it to work efficiently. So for me, I specialize in firstly on scraping tools because I
Hmm.
think scraping obviously was always important, but it's taken an even more, there's been a panacea of new demand for scraping and high quality data tools for to get the whole generative AI models working efficiently, and obviously for internally for the whole lead generation and revenue generation through CRMs tools, Apify, for example, bringing that kind of data into generative AI models using automation tools like Zapier or Make,
Hmm.
link those different tech stacks together, and then using tools like Apollo or Clay, which are excellent prospecting. And we've seen this kind of the rise of new automated, not quite, maybe not sales agents at this point, but a revolution in these types of sales outreach tools that is happening right now. So it's quite exciting. I think if I look at the technology landscape and compare it between today and what was available, let's say last year, it's been an exponential growth in the number of tools, in the ability of these tools to actually integrate together. And then when you layer that with LLM, within the generative AI layer, then you can do a lot of magic with it. So
Yeah.
it's really about helping companies target better, prospect better, be able to super customize their messaging for. We used to talk about segmentation, but now we can really talk about super personalized emails that can be done at scale. And maybe this capability was there in the past, but it required a lot of resources.
Yeah.
There was a lot of overheads in terms of generating super or hyper personalized messaging. But now you can do it at scale, and you can do it at scale with low capacity, right? So you don't need to be a Fortune 500 company to pull off some of this super and the hyper personalization campaigns that you can using the combination of these tools.
Mhm. Yeah, no, for sure. And there's a lot of players now in this space, especially with the generative AI and personalizing emails. I'm curious, what have you found to be, I don't know if the secret sauce is the right term, but the way to differentiate those emails so they don't come off like a robot wrote them, or something to that degree. I've heard a lot from many different people. Even I get a ton of cold emails every day as well. And seeing, you can almost tell instantly, oh, this was written by an AI bot or whatever the case will be. So I'm curious on your end, is it more so you're using the generative AI to build templates, and then you're, even though they're personalized, you're going in there and customizing them further? Or is there something different that you're doing to allow those emails to breathe and feel human?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, because I think a lot of times people skip over that kind of a personal tone to emails that's really required, right? I think it really, if you want to do this at scale and to do it at scale without it sounding generic or generated by AI, one of the key elements is, of course, in how you train the generative AI that's driving the personalization, right? So
Yeah.
it's all about providing the right kind of personality and context. So you can see that if you compare, for example, some of the chat GPT outputs that you had last year compared to this year, as these models have developed over this time span, and if you actually invest into training these models into having a personality that does sound authentic, because yeah, absolutely, sounding robotic is the last thing that you want.
For sure.
So that's one thing, being able to inject your personality into these training models so that in the future it starts to generate human, very personable outputs. And then obviously the other element of it is integrating as much dynamic content into the email. This can be done through data enrichment so that you're able to really super customize the email to your target. That's just, I think that's one element. If we're talking about emailing, I think that's just one element of really successful emailing. You can see now with all the changes in that were implemented in the last few months by the ESPs, the email service providers, that it's becoming increasingly hard for those actual emails, even if they are super personalized, to land or to be placed in the main inbox of customers. So it's email health continues to be a very important topic. Things like DMARC and SPF certifications and ensuring that you're warming up the IPs. But I think what I see with these new kind of, let's say, automated prospecting tools is they tend to integrate all of these kind of best use cases. So they resolve a lot of the issues that maybe traditional tools didn't have because they were very maybe segmented, right?
Yeah,
So
no,
now,
most certainly. And many of them, I know if they don't already, they're starting to come out with more features for, deliverability and sendability of those emails. But the issue really comes to play when people are sending at scale. Because then once you get to a certain scale, you really gotta set up different domains or use subdomains and have warming emails going and so on and so forth, potentially even rotating IP addresses, which is a time suck more than anything else. I wouldn't call it the most difficult thing in the world, but it definitely takes a lot of time away from conversions and copywriting
yeah,
and things of that nature.
yeah, I think, but see, that's the issue too. I see it as this whole concept that we should send emails at scale. For me, is not valid because the most important thing now is targeting, right? Because you actually don't want to send emails. Of course, you want to send as much as you can, but I think being more conservative in the targeting is always going to lead to better results, right? And I think with these new data enrichment tools, you have that capacity to actually maybe trim down where in the past you would have said, okay, let me hammer it out to everybody that might convert, to
Yeah.
now being, yeah, focusing more on the
Yeah.
right target.
No, that's true. And I think in order to do that, though, backtracking, you have to have a really clear and defined ICP and whom you're going after, depending on, because I know sometimes people in the beginning they're loosely trying to define their ICPs. While they're A/B testing, they may end up sending more in that time span until they maybe get their first 100 customers or so, and then, oh, okay, here's our niche. Here's where we can focus on from a cold email standpoint. But then also, as fractional CMO, I'm sure you know yourself, you want to definitely have a multi-channel approach for lead generation, whether that's email, paid ads, organic social on like LinkedIn or Reddit or whatever the case may be. So you have multiple opportunities, as well as obviously optimizing your website to capture leads as well. Do you have any experience in that department in terms of setting all that stuff up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really highlighted a great point here regarding the ICP,
Hmm.
because I think this kind of exercise is usually done haphazardly. I think for me now, with just to go back on what I was talking about in regards to data, having, being able, or at least having access to more data, both from inside your own, let's say, technology stack or infrastructure, and from your competitors, allows you to actually laser focus on more relevant ICPs, right? And maybe
Yep.
the other question in terms of ICP is the buyer persona and the buying committee who are connected to that ICP. I agree absolutely, and I think with kind of this influx of new tools, I think it's still critical that people invest that time in determining who their right ICP is, especially not only for conversions, but maybe from the highest CLTV customers, because at the end of the day, it's great to get new customers, but what you really want is high quality customers who are not going to churn, who provide a positive uptick to your MRR or ARR. Being more focused on ICP and investing that time initially, I think pays a lot of dividends down the road.
Oh, for sure. And granted, things change. Sometimes, hey, this is our ICP this year, and next year maybe, hey, there's a new ICP, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But to always be paying attention to that, tweaking it, looking at it to ensure that you are going after the most, because that's also just going to help with inbox placement and all that as well. If you're reaching out to a ton of people who are the wrong people, they're going to be much more quick to mark something as spam or so on and so forth, versus if you're at least going to the right people, even if it's not something they need in that moment, they'll be least likely to mark it as spam, especially if it's personalized and not coming off as robotic or anything like that.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And obviously there's also from an ICP point of view, I think it differs when you're in, let's say, a mature company where you
Yeah,
have historical data where you can do that kind of backwards analysis where you look at who are your highest converting customers, where they came from, what their job titles were, their industries, their turnover, etc. And when you are a company starting out and you're still trying to find product market fit, with that kind of like market fit exercise, you still don't really know who your ICP is
right.
necessarily. You're throwing your product out on the market and you're hoping to see what sticks, right? So I think it's the ICP exercise is different depending on the product maturity and maybe the company history and how much historical data it has. But I think the obviously the principles stay the same.
Oh, no, most certainly. You're absolutely right. Because also when you're mature, depending on how much market share you own as well, you may not necessarily be doing a lot of cold emailing. It may be more inbound and referral based at that point. Again, depending on your market share and how much of your audience knows of you and things of that nature. But that's not to say that there wouldn't be any cold emailing. But then at that point, hey, you might not be as worried about inbox placement and people marking your spam because your name is out there to the point that people know who you are. So if they do get an email, they're like, oh yeah, I know those guys, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, sure. Brand value plays a huge role in deliverability and inbox placement. It's obviously when you have that brand, it's much easier to send those emails and send emails at a mass scale than when you're first starting out and you're trying to warm up your IP and people don't recognize your name still. So obviously that comes into
Gotcha.
play.
And I'm sure you work with both, but currently, do you find yourself more working with these more mature brands or people more in that maybe not super beginning, but trying to build or trying to gain that market share? Maybe they have an ICP, but they're still looking to maybe define it more and things like that, or are you working more with those mature brands?
Yeah, ever since I started consulting recently, it's been really more of those companies still trying to find that product market fit. I
Gotcha.
think for me, it's more dynamic, this type of work. Because I think a lot of with mature brands, they've really established an ICP and they might have A/B tested across the different years, but there's a kind of an established structure and an almost a bureaucracy to the whole ICP exercise. But with new brands, it's more exciting, right? You experimenting and trying to find out what's going to click with your target audience and what's going to really lead to conversions and what type of ICPs are really going to resonate with your product. So it's definitely, I think, in the last, for me at least, in the last
Mm,
while, I've been focusing mainly on helping newer companies find the product market fit and the relevant
Gotcha.
ICP.
And have you found that there's, with these newer brands, any like common threads that you notice between them in terms of maybe mistakes that they've all make, or maybe majority of them make prior to working with you, that you've seen that, oh, with 80% of the people I've worked with, I have to correct these three
Yeah.
things or something like that?
I think when you look at new companies, startups, or either seeded companies or Series A companies, they're primarily product-led growth or founder-led growth, even FLG.
Mm,
So there's a presumption of, okay, we have this customer pain, and here's a product that meets this customer pain. So they've already have these maybe, and I'm not talking about everyone exclusively, because what I've seen is also newer companies tend to iterate more and they can pivot faster. But in terms of like common mistakes, I would say that there's always a kind of a presumption based on, let's say, the features that were built, about how these features actually fulfill different customer pains. I think there's a tendency to build too many features, not to go to
mhm.
that kind of MVP stage quick enough, because in many cases, they might stack the product with too many features before testing it out. So that's, I think, one of the primary maybe mistakes that a lot of companies do make, is that they don't release an MVP fast enough, or they build too many features in the product before going out to the market. And in many cases, it's just over featured.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That makes sense because that's also probably what delays them from getting their MVP out faster, because they want to have version 1.0 as robust as possible versus just getting the basic version out there to even see if there's product market fit at the core with the core functionality that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, that sounds great. I like the sound of that. And then lastly, with some of these marketing efforts, I've seen obviously there's a lot more with the advent of all these tools. There's a lot of people, claiming to be consultants going out there and just quickly spinning up these services. And I've seen a lot of organizations and agencies get burned with work. And I'm wondering, A, if that's something you've noticed on your end, and B, if so, I'd love to let the audience know, hey, what are maybe some good questions to ask a fractional CMO if you're looking to hire one or bring in a consultant to get a real vibe for their credibility, because anybody can spin up a LinkedIn account and put some
Yeah.
credentials on a website or whatever the case may be. And so just curious on your end, if there's anything that you've noticed that you've had to A, safeguard against, and B, questions that you think would be the good questions to ask for someone to be able to realize, oh, okay, this person knows what they're talking about versus the other way around.
Yeah. There is obviously now that, because it's not the first time that I work in a, say, a revenue agency or an ad agency, a digital agency.
Mhm.
But I think in many cases there is a tendency to approach agencies, and there's a preconceived notions of what these companies want from agencies. They'll say, okay, we need some Google search campaign because we have the SaaS solution and we heard that paid search is the way to go. But in many cases, obviously, the channel mix is really, in a lot of times, dependent also on what type of business you're in. So if, let's say, you have a long sales funnel, or you're in a SaaS business, which is not necessarily transactional. Maybe paid search is not the right channel for you. Maybe having field marketing or going offline is the right way to go. So I think there's this tendency to approach agencies after decisions have been made regarding here's what we're going to do. We just need somebody to implement it without doing that due diligence and trying to figure out, okay, maybe we need to take a step back and figure out, okay, what is the right channel mix that we need for our product, right? Because
Yeah.
for me, that's the basis, trying to figure out based on your ICP, what is the right channel mix and where you should be investing time and resources. So I think that's having agencies as partners rather than just doers, in my view, is the way to go.
Yeah.
Because another mistake that a lot of companies do is that they treat kind of agencies because for me, I watched it work when it's treated as a relationship. So the same
Hmm.
relationship that you have management with its employees. If a company has the same kind of relationship with its agency, and that's when you see the magic happen because magic doesn't happen without going deep, right? If you're doing things on the superficial level, running campaigns on the superficial level or PR activities on the superficial level, then implementation is always going to be not optimized as what it should be. If you
Okay.
kind of build that relationship and you onboard agencies early enough to give them those insights into your business and have them give you this feedback loop about what actually worked for other clients. Because really, when we talk about agencies, isn't that really the biggest value from them? Is that they're able to share experiences across the board, right? So instead of having this kind of echo room where you're trying to see what might work, you onboard an agency that's worked with tens or hundreds of other clients and have that kind of historical framework of what works in which context.
Yeah, absolutely. Paying for that. You're ultimately, I think of it as you're ultimately paying for expertise and know-how to bring that in internally so that you don't have to spend 4 or 5 years to
Yeah.
get that institutional knowledge that the agency already has. So no, 100% agree.
I do see that as LLM models develop, definitely there is kind of a fear, especially among my peers and people that I talk to, both consultants and on the agency side, that a lot of the deep subject matter expert is being transferred into the LLM model. And maybe it's better to be the jack of all trades now. But I think people still require that human touch and that kind
Yeah.
of human experience. So obviously there is that fear on one side, but
Hmm. No, I actually think it's the reverse. I think the jack of all trades thing, that's probably where people are not going now as more often.
yeah,
Whereas if you specialize in, hey, I specialize in cold emailing B2B, for example, a B2B SaaS, being
yeah,
very specific and very granular, I think there's still value there from a consultant and agency perspective. Now, maybe the ROI has to be changed around and the business model has to be changed around a little bit. That might be true. But in terms of just that assistance, I find many organizations now will speak to different types of consultants for very specific use cases versus going to that jack of all trades, because that jack of all trades, they may be very good in a particular area. In the other areas, they're just leveraging the same language models that you have access to on Chat GPT or something like that, versus if speaking and working with individuals who are experts in a dedicated lane. I think it's much easier, to your point about speaking directly to your ICP and speaking directly to a use case. It makes it very clear to a prospect, oh, okay, this is what they do, this is what I can expect. So now they come into those maybe demo calls or introductory calls with a clear message, a clear, hey, this is what we are looking for, and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, there are a lot of people, I've noticed that too, who are a little worried that the AI guy is going to take their gig. But I think there'll always be need for consultancy in terms of how to leverage these things, because at least currently as they stand, they're just tools, but you got to know how to use the tools. And B, I just think it means that you got to be that much more specific in your expertise and outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this kind of let's say fear of technologies is not a new thing, right?
True.
Uh, if you remember back in the pre-internet era, there was a lot of fear regarding what the internet was going to displace, and in terms of we see it clearly, right? Technology is a net positive at the end. It contributes to massive increase in GDP growth and new roles. So I think really the key, and that's why for me the last few months have really been focusing on how do I position myself in this kind of new era of work, right? Because yes, I think there will be a lot of displacement. AI and generative AI will bring a lot of displacement to existing work, but really it's about how do you account for this, new prompt engineering or integration of LLM models with data contextualized retrieval and all of this type of, or what I think is going to be the future of work. I think Microsoft is next month is probably rolling out these Copilot agents, right? They've had
Yeah. Yeah.
Copilot before, but now they have these kind of work agents that will be self-sufficient, literally be able to, because now there's an execution problem, right? With the LLM models, right? You can go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of these tools, and you can connect it with obviously with automation tools, but the the execution of tasks is not seamless, right? There still
Right.
need there still needs to come be that integration layer, and it's a bit complicated. If companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Apple with Apple Intelligence, which is rolling out next year, if they're able to actually go over that barrier of execution, so being able to really use agents to execute tasks, then obviously that might
Definitely change things.
tasks redundant. But I think in the long term, I'm an optimist, right? So it's a net positive because when you look at it in the past, with the introduction of any new technology, there's been kind of disruption in terms of people losing their jobs. But you look back about all the new roles or the new kind of industries that the internet has provided, or now with Web 3.0, all this value that it's unlocking. And I think that will happen with AI too, right?
Oh yeah,
And we're
most
starting, of course,
definitely.
obviously we're starting
Yeah.
to see that, but I think it's still early days.
No, most certainly. You could even make the argument it's still early days in the internet. The internet's been around what,
90s.
uh 90s, I would say. Yeah, I mean, it was around in the 80s, but let's really call it 95, 96 is probably when it really got first kind of mainstream. That's not
Yeah.
that old. That's what, 30 years, give or take. So, and now AI is in its infancy. So, yeah, I completely agree that as time progresses and we more tools will be introduced, more features will be introduced, more jobs will be created. Yes, some jobs will be obsolete, but things will be there to replace them. So I don't think it's the end of the world per se. It's just a matter of adapting. And if you don't
Yeah.
adapt, yeah, you end up like Blockbuster.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but that's just the way it is.
It's funny. Everyone brings up the Blockbuster example, right? I lived 8 years in Vancouver, and I remember Rogers Video. I don't know if you had you're from California, right?
No, I'm originally from Connecticut, so I'm from the
Okay.
East Coast. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I remember we had this kind of Blockbuster. It was very similar, Rogers Video. It was the Blockbuster of Canada at the time, and
for
just
sure.
to kind of see how that when Netflix was really taking off, and that's I think that analogy is just perfect because yes, it's true that Blockbuster and Rogers Video are gone, but in their space you have all these streaming sites, and we see how
Exactly.
Netflix has actually produced a whole sub-industry of if you look at the amount of video production and movies that are created today compared to when we had Blockbuster and
Oh yeah, it's night and day, night and
yeah,
day.
yeah, absolutely. And it's global, right? Blockbuster, if you wanted to go global, you would have to open retail outlets in different countries. But with Netflix, at least licensing is one thing, right? But once you get movies licensed in different jurisdiction, it goes global and it unlocks a lot of value for both the TV and the movie industry.
Yeah,
So
no, certainly. They just got to be able to leverage it. And that's a whole nother conversation. Some of these studios, their budgets might be a little too high, but that's not Netflix fault. But that's a whole, like I said,
yeah.
that's a whole nother thing with the movie theaters and things of that nature. But yeah, you can even look at it like with retail today.
Yeah.
Your Macy's, J.C. Penney's, at least here in the States, they haven't adjusted like an Amazon did, and Best Buy, Walmart. Walmart's definitely still around. Best Buy, they're all still around, but they definitely don't have the market share that they used to have. That's for sure. What's going to happen? There's always be disruptors, and it's just a matter of being able to see that disruption, adapt to it, and go from there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You look at the kind of like huge value that actually Amazon unlocked with drop shippers and the FBA program, and
You know.
it's just amazing. Many times these kind of disruptions, obviously they will make a lot of jobs obsolete, but it's a net positive in the end, I think.
Okay. Perfect. No, absolutely. You're 100% right. Typically, those big disruptors, at least maybe not instantaneously, but there's typically a sub industry, as you mentioned, that develops under them, or even multiple sub industries. Because yeah, you got your Amazon dropshipping for sure. You have even something like Etsy,
Yeah.
all these Etsy sellers and things of that nature. It's a big business. Certainly excited to see what will come out of this new journey that we're all on with it.
Yeah, 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 for sure. It's with obviously I'm a father, so I have concerns, especially with deep fakes. We saw some of this stuff play out, and you guys are having an election now, right?
Yeah,
I think election day is in November 5th or something.
that's a good question. I think it's the fourth actually, but don't quote me. I don't know, fifth or fourth, something like that. I
Yeah,
should know.
yeah. So
Mm,
obviously there's a lot of risk too when we talk about deep fakes and
You're right, the
potential
fifth.
for issues arising from that. It'll be interesting to see how things evolve in the next few years with the AI and where it leads to, not just in the workplace, but just in general.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's always a little bit of bad, a little bit of good. Nothing can be 100% good. That's just not life
Yeah.
doesn't work that way. But it's a matter of being able to see those things, safeguard against them as much as possible. But overall, I think things will be mostly positive. With that being said, I could do this all day, but I certainly don't want to take up all your time. But
Yeah.
before I let you go, I like to end these with, I call it like one last gem. So basically, if someone leaves this conversation, what would be the one thing that you want them to take with them?
Yeah. For me, we've discussed this before, but I think the introduction of AI into every aspect of the funnel for B2B SaaS um, is going to revolutionize the way that we do lead generation, revenue generation. And for me, the key is staying or to stay up front on these kind of new developments is to constantly learn, constantly experiment with tools that are coming out. I think when I look at all the knowledge sharing that happens online on LinkedIn or on Twitter, for example, that's a big source of learning and development for me. So I think that's key because what worked even 6 months ago might not work in the next
Right.
6 months. So staying agile and adaptable, I think that's going to be the name of the game in this period. And yeah, I'm super optimistic about the future of both marketing and AI. And I think it's a gold rush moment, right? Because when we look back, let's say the advent of the internet, the introduction of e-commerce, these are the early days of those times, right? And being aggressive today is what's going to pay dividends in the next few years. It doesn't come, right? It's a kind of a generational thing, right?
Yeah,
Um,
no, for sure.
so yeah, it's exciting, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to come on the show with you.
Oh, absolutely. The pleasure is all mine, and I'm sure we'll do it again down the line and go from there. But hey, it was my pleasure speaking to you as well. And to everybody in the audience, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the CRO Initiative. And until next time, have a great day.
Thank you.